Tell her this isn't a mess hall for injured soldiers. The VIP room isn't the place for someone who can't stand straight, and I don't want my business partners feeling uncomfortable all evening. Those were my sister's words, relayed to me by a flustered 26-year-old event coordinator standing at the entrance of the Hazelton Hotel in Yorkville, Toronto. The young woman couldn't quite meet my eyes when she said it. I was standing on Cumberland Street in my Canadian Armed Forces service dress, the one I'd kept pressed in a garment bag since my medical release, holding a gift-wrap box of Thomas's favorite maple fudge and a single white peony because I couldn't find white roses at the Kingston Farmers Market that morning. My left hip had been throbbing since Belleville, 3 hours into a 4-hour drive, because the seat in my 15-year-old Civic doesn't recline far enough to take the pressure off the titanium plate where my pelvis used to fit together the way it was born to. I stood very still on that sidewalk for about 4 seconds. The evening doorman in a charcoal suit was pretending to check his clipboard. The coordinator was pretending to look past my shoulder. I looked down at the small gift. Then I looked up at the hotel's brushed copper facade, and I did not say a word. I thanked the coordinator quietly, turned around, and walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and opened the TD Bank app on my phone. 3 taps. That was all it took to permanently cancel the automatic Interac e-transfer of $1,800 that had been leaving my account on the first of every month for 36 consecutive months. She had no idea that the woman she'd just turned away from a Yorkville hotel door was the only reason she still owned her Etobicoke condo. Let me back up 3 years. Because what happened outside that hotel didn't begin there. I was 20 when our father passed from a cardiac event in Sudbury, leaving me, the older one, as the only person standing between my 14-year-old sister and a very uncertain future. Our mother was present but not steady. She loved us the way that certain people love things they can't quite hold, fiercely from a distance, but unreliable when it counted. So I made the only decision that felt solid. I enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces as a combat engineer with 2 Combat Engineer Regiment out of CFB Petawawa, because the steady military pay was the clearest path I could see to making sure my sister never had to drop out of school over a hydro bill. I served for 14 years, 2 tours to Kandahar. I supervised construction of forward operating bases, maintained field roads under fire, and trained local engineers in rudimentary bridge building techniques in a language I'd learned phonetically in 6 weeks. In 2011, our convoy hit an IED on a patrol route outside Spin Boldak. I don't talk about what happened in detail. What's relevant is that when I came home to Petawawa 6 months later, I had a 4-inch titanium plate in my left pelvis, a medical release classification, and a monthly disability pension from Veterans Affairs Canada that would keep me housed and functional, provided I didn't do anything reckless with it, like give half of it away. Thomas was the one who helped me figure out how to be a civilian again. He was a Finnish carpenter from Kingston, 12 years older than me, the kind of man who could spend 45 minutes adjusting the fit of a door hinge, and looked genuinely content doing it. We weren't married, but we were together for 7 years. And when he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in the winter of 2021, I spent 14 months being his primary caregiver and refusing to let him apologize for any of it. He died on a Tuesday in February, with the CBC morning show on the radio and the winter light doing something soft and strange through the bedroom curtains. He left me his tools, his truck, and a small handmade maple box with dovetail joints that he'd cut by hand the first Christmas we were together. He kept the box on the nightstand. I keep it on mine now. My sister had come to Kingston twice that year to help out. She folded laundry, made soup, sat with Thomas on the afternoons when I was at the VAC office fighting with paperwork. She was good to him. She was warm and present, and I remember thinking, during those visits, that whatever distance had grown between us, since she'd moved to Toronto, was thinner than I'd thought. That maybe we were still the same 2 people who used to share a bedroom in Sudbury and leave notes under each other's pillows. 6 months after Thomas died, she called me at 11 o'clock at night. She'd launched an event planning and private catering business in Toronto 2 years earlier, upscale corporate events, gallery openings, that sort of thing. The pandemic had gutted the industry, and she'd burned through her savings trying to survive it. Now she was 3 months behind on the mortgage for her condo in Etobicoke, and the bank had sent a notice. She was crying so hard I could barely make out the words. I didn't ask a lot of questions. She was my sister, she was scared, and I had a steady pension coming in every month. I set up the Interac e-transfer the following morning. $1,800 on the first of every month, directly into her account. I told myself it was temporary. A bridge loan, the way Thomas would have called it. Thomas had actually said something about it at the time, sitting at the kitchen table while I pulled up my banking app. He watched me confirm the recurring transfer and was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're a combat engineer, Colette. You know better than anyone. You build a bridge to carry somebody across a gap. You don't build one for them to live on. I told him I knew. I told him it was temporary. 36 months later, I was still sending the money. In the 3 years those transfers ran, my sister's business recovered. She started doing well, genuinely well by the look of things. She hired staff. She moved her office to a better address in the annex. She bought a Land Rover. I saw the photos on Instagram, catered tables at financial district launch parties, her in a blazer at someone's waterfront event, captions like "built this from the ground up, nobody hands you anything in this city." Meanwhile, the back stair on my Kingston bungalow had 2 rotted boards I'd been meaning to replace for a year. The cost to fix them properly was just over $1,000. I kept moving the project back because the first of the month kept arriving. When her wedding invitation came 6 weeks before the ceremony, there was no note inside, no handwritten card, no RSVP form, no meal preference slip, just the venue name, the Hazelton Hotel, Yorkville, and a timeline printed on heavy stock paper. I called her that evening and asked if I'd missed a page in the envelope. She laughed, the kind of laugh designed to make you feel like you've asked something slightly stupid. "Don't stress about the details," she said. "Just show up. I've handled everything. I heard a cork being pulled somewhere in the background. You'll be at a good table. You'll be fine." She hung up before I could ask which table that was. On the morning of the wedding, I got up at 5 and took my hip medication with the first of 3 coffees. I ironed my service dress with a clothes iron that overheats if you use it more than 7 minutes at a stretch, so the process took twice as long as it should have. I drove 40 minutes to the nearest florist before they opened, waited in the parking lot, and when they unlocked the door, I bought a single white peony, the closest thing they had to a white rose, and a small box of maple fudge from the display case by the register because I couldn't arrive at my sister's wedding empty-handed. The peony was for the family memorial display. I wanted Thomas represented. 4 hours on the 401. I kept the radio off. I rehearsed the toast I'd been planning in my head, the one about watching my sister grow from the teenager I used to drive to volleyball practice into the woman who could pull off a Yorkville event with 12 hours' notice. The speech wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and I thought it might make her cry a little. I think you already know what happened when I got there. The drive home was worse than the drive down. The hip medication had worn off, and I didn't want to pull over to take more because I was afraid that if I stopped moving, I wouldn't start again. Somewhere east of Oshawa, I put on a CBC radio documentary about migratory birds, and I focused on the narrator's voice, and I did not let myself think about anything else. I got back to Kingston just after 11. I unlocked the front door, filled a glass of water, and sat at the kitchen table with Thomas's maple box. I opened the lid and ran my fingers along the dovetail joints he'd cut by hand. Inside were the things I kept there. The last photo of the 2 of us, a folded letter from my commanding officer after Afghanistan, a small spruce lapel pin from our first Christmas. I sat with it for a long time. Then I closed it, stood up, and went to bed. Please hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to quietly hold the door shut instead of slamming it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right there. In the weeks that followed, I noticed things I hadn't noticed in 3 years. The way my shoulders didn't tighten on the first of the month. The way I made it through an entire week of groceries without checking my account balance twice a day. I went to the VAC regional office and met with a financial benefits counselor named Helena, a 50-year-old woman with reading glasses on a lanyard and the kind of no-nonsense warmth I've only ever encountered in people who've spent decades helping veterans navigate paperwork that wasn't designed to be navigated. She pulled up my account summary and looked at the numbers for a moment. "That recurring transfer is gone," she said, and it wasn't a question. She didn't editorialize. She just said, "The full pension amount is yours now. What do you want to do with it?" I told her about the back stair. She told me about a VAC home modification benefit I'd never applied for. We spent an hour going through it together. There was a veteran support group I'd been attending off and on for 2 years. 4 of us, retired NCOs from different branches, who met Tuesday afternoons at a diner near the Kingston waterfront. A 60-year-old retired warrant officer named Gus, who'd done 3 rotations to Bosnia and had a laugh that came up from somewhere deep, slid a black coffee across the table toward me one afternoon without asking how I took it. He looked at my hip brace and he nodded once, the nod that doesn't need explaining. We didn't talk about the wedding. We didn't talk about my sister. We talked about a problem he was having with his truck's differential, and then we talked about whether the diner's pea soup had gotten worse since they changed cooks. And by the time I drove home, I felt more like myself than I had in months. 3 weeks after the wedding, I drove to a medical supply store off Division Street and bought a proper orthopedic recliner, the kind designed specifically for people with pelvic injuries, with a lumbar support that actually reaches where it needs to reach. When the delivery crew set it up, I sat down and felt something release in my lower back that I hadn't realized was clenched. I sat there for 20 minutes doing nothing at all. I found the birthday card in a kitchen drawer one evening while looking for a battery. It was from 20-some years ago. She would have been about 10. I would have been in my mid-20s, just back from my first tour. Crayon on construction paper. She'd drawn both of us in what was clearly meant to be military gear, though I appeared to be wearing a bright orange hat. At the bottom it said, in the careful printing of a child still learning to make her letters even, "You're the bravest person I know, and I want to be like you." I held the card for a long time. Then I put it in Thomas's maple box on top of the photo of the two of us, and I closed the lid. 31 days after the wedding, I was in the produce section of the Kingston Military Commissary when my phone buzzed. Her name on the screen, a text, not a call. "Hey, the mortgage payment didn't go through this month. Can you check what happened with your transfer?" 12 words. No punctuation at the end of the first sentence. No question mark. No, how are you? How's your hip? I've been thinking about what happened. 12 words and an implicit assumption that whatever had gone wrong with the transfer was a technical problem on my end, something to be corrected and explained and apologized for, all by me. I read it 3 times standing in front of a display of Ontario greenhouse tomatoes. A woman was shopping nearby with a toddler in the cart seat, a little girl in a bright yellow coat who pointed at my service cap and said something enthusiastic and completely unintelligible. The mother looked up, startled, and said immediately, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, she does that with hats. I'm sorry, are you all right?" The apology was out of her mouth before she'd finished registering that I was fine, before she'd assessed whether the situation called for one. Pure reflex. Basic human courtesy, automatic and genuine. I smiled at the little girl and told the mother it was completely all right. Then I put my phone back in my pocket. I finished my shopping, drove home, unpacked the groceries, made dinner, washed the dishes, dried them, put them away. Then I sat down, picked up my phone, and typed 6 words back. "Then I suggest you pay it." I set the phone face down on the table and went to read. She called 9 times in the next 2 hours. I watched the screen light up and go dark and light up again. The next morning she sent 3 texts in 15 minutes. "Call me back. Then this isn't funny. Something is clearly wrong with your banking app. Then the bank is calling me. I need you to fix this today." She was certain it was a glitch. It did not occur to her, not once, based on the texts, that what had happened was intentional. The voicemail she left that evening was nearly 4 minutes long. She demanded to know what was going on with my military bank account settings. She used the phrase, "This is really bad timing," twice. She did not say my name once. I pressed delete. If you've ever been the person in your family who kept the lights on for everyone else and got a billing notice in return, hit that like button right now. And leave me a comment. Would you have answered that phone? Because I want to know. 3 days later, on a Saturday morning in October, someone knocked on my front door. Hard, urgent knocks, the kind that means the person on the other side has been driving for a while and has something important to say. My sister's husband was standing on my porch. I'd met him a handful of times, at their engagement dinner in Toronto, once when they'd driven through Kingston on their way back from visiting his family in Ottawa. He was a high school physics teacher from Nepean, 43 years old, the kind of steady person you don't worry about. He was holding a kitchen towel wrapped around something, and even before he spoke, I could smell it. Butter tarts. The real kind, pastry shell butter tarts, with a filling that ran slightly and crystallized on top, the way they're supposed to. Thomas's recipe, the one he'd taught my sister's husband the Christmas before Thomas died. Because he'd asked, because he was the kind of person who asked about things like that and meant it. "Colette," he almost gasped it. "Thank God. Your sister told me your hip had a bad flare-up after the wedding. She said you were in so much pain you couldn't get out of bed, that you'd had an anxiety episode and you were devastated to miss the ceremony. I've been texting every few days, and you haven't answered, and I thought, I didn't know what to think. Can you walk? Are you okay?" I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I opened it wider and said, "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." We sat at the kitchen table with the butter tarts between us. He was looking at me with a relief that was slowly curdling into confusion, because I was walking without a cane and making tea without difficulty, and not particularly resembling a person who'd spent 3 weeks in a pain spiral. I asked him to tell me exactly what my sister had said. He told me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I set my mug down. "I need to make one phone call," I said. "I'd like you to stay in the room while I do." The event coordinator had emailed me 4 days after the wedding. It had gone to my spam folder, and I'd only found it during a routine clear-out the week before. She was 27 years old, and she'd clearly written the email late at night. She apologized for her part in what happened. She said the image of a veteran in service dress being turned away from a hotel entrance in the dark had been with her every night since. She mentioned her own grandfather had served in Cyprus, and she was sorry. And she said she had kept a copy of the email instructions she'd received from my sister 5 days before the wedding, the one directing her to remove my seat, and she would forward it to me if I wanted it. I had written back the same evening and said yes. I opened my email on the kitchen table between us. I turned the phone so he could read my sister's words on the screen. Please remove my sister Colette from the table by the family memorial display. I don't want to deal with liability questions if a guest trips over a cane or crutch on the dance floor. She tends to make things about her service history, and I don't want that energy at my event in front of my clients. He read it once, then he read it again. He set the phone down very carefully, the way you put something down when you need your hands to be empty so you can think. I got up, went to the shelf in the hallway, and carried Thomas's maple box to the table. I set it down beside the plate of butter tarts and asked him to open it. He undid the brass latch slowly. Inside, on top of the photo and the spruce lapel pin and the birthday card, was a stapled packet of paper, the coordinator's apology email, the forwarded instruction from my sister, and a cover page I'd printed from my TD bank account history. 36 months of outgoing Interac e-transfers, $1,800 each, perfectly consistent first business day of every month. 36 transfers, total of $64,800. He looked at the numbers for a long time. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. The mortgage, he said. It wasn't a question. The whole thing, I said. For 3 years, from my VAC pension, she told everyone she built the business from nothing. He put his hands over his face. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way a person does when they need a moment that no one can see into. I heard a car in the driveway before he'd taken his hands down. She'd been following him. She hadn't known where he was going when he left the house that morning, but when his mother called her, his mother, who'd been on the phone with me earlier that morning when I'd asked, quietly, whether she'd seen my name on the family seating chart at the reception, my sister had figured it out. She was across the 401 in under 3 hours. She came through my front door, without knocking. She stopped when she saw him at the table. She stopped when she saw the maple box open and the printed transfer records and her own email on the screen. The color left her face the way heat leaves a room, fast and total, leaving everything cold behind it. He stood up, he held the phone out to her and asked her to read it. She started to explain. She said it was about venue logistics, about liability coverage, about not wanting me to feel out of place at a formal event with my mobility issues. Her voice was steady at first and then it wasn't. She reached for his arm. He stepped back. 3 years, he said. His voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow worse than if it had been loud. 3 years she was sending you money every single month. You stood up in front of your clients and told that whole story about building your business from nothing, doing it all yourself. And she was here in Kingston, in a house with a broken stair she couldn't afford to repair, sending you $1,800 a month out of her disability pension. She opened her mouth. He shook his head. Please don't, he said. Not right now. He unclasped his watch, his father's, a steel Seiko with a worn leather band he'd had since university, and set it on the table beside the e-transfer records. Then he reached for his phone and began reading the notifications that had been arriving for the past hour. A supplier in Mississauga who'd been waiting on an outstanding invoice. A rental company for catering equipment she'd been leasing. 2 emails from her bank about a credit line review flagged for irregularities in her last 2 annual filings. He read the subject lines aloud, one by one, without looking at her. She sat down on my kitchen chair, the old one without the lumbar support, and she put her hands flat on the table, and she didn't say anything. He set his watch on top of the printed transfer records. I'm going to call the supplier in Mississauga this afternoon and arrange a payment from my personal savings so their team gets paid on time. He looked at my sister. And then we're going home and we're going to sort through everything, all of it, and figure out what's real. I'm not walking away from you. But the way things have been is done. She nodded. She couldn't look at me. I put my hand on the table next to Thomas's box. I'm not going to give you money, I said. Not because I want you to suffer. Because money isn't what fixes what's broken here. I waited until she was looking at me. But if you want to sit at this table and figure out how to build something that's actually yours, honestly, from the real number, I'll help you do that. She started crying then. Not dramatically. She put her face in her hands and cried the way someone does when they finally stop holding something that's been too heavy for a long time. I didn't reach over and comfort her. I let her cry until she was finished. Then I said, let's start with your actual monthly overhead. We spent 4 hours at that kitchen table. I went through her business accounts with her the way I used to plan logistics for forward operating base resupply, methodically, without sentiment, looking only at what was real. The Land Rover lease, for $400 a month. The annex office she used 3 days a week when she could conduct client calls from home, $2,200 a month. A brand retainer she'd been paying a Vancouver designer for 16 months for materials she'd never used, $550 a month. She didn't argue with any of it. She wrote down every number I called out, and she didn't look away from a single one. When the total annual overhead reduction hit $49,000, she set down her pen. I thought if I looked like I'd made it, she said quietly. Eventually, I actually would have. That's not how it works, I said. I know that now. He drove her home that evening. Before he left, he stood in my doorway for a moment and looked at the butter tarts, still mostly uneaten on the plate. Thomas's recipe, he said. He made them every Thanksgiving, I said. He always said they were better the second day. He nodded. I'll remember that. In the months that followed, my sister did what she needed to do, not because I gave her an option, but because she ran out of other choices and discovered, slowly, that honest work fits better than she'd expected. She took on small residential renovation contracts through a local referral network in Etobicoke, the kind of jobs that don't make Instagram but that pay their subcontractors on time and don't pad the materials invoices. She hired a bookkeeper. She filed amended returns with the CRA. She drove a used Honda Civic, the color of a gray November sky. He took on an extra section of AP Physics to cover the income gap while her business rebuilt. He didn't complain about it that I could tell. 3 months later, a letter arrived at my Kingston address in my sister's handwriting. Inside was a dinner invitation written on plain paper, with an Etobicoke address and a time and a single line at the bottom. We've saved the seat at the head of the table for you. It's yours. I drove to Toronto on a Sunday in January. The Land Rover was gone from the driveway. Her husband's Subaru was parked beside a neat stack of lumber under a tarp on the side of the house. Inside, the catered tablecloths and rented centerpiece arrangements were gone from the dining room. In their place was a table they'd built together, solid maple, the joints done properly, the kind of table that would outlast everyone sitting around it. He'd worked from a joinery technique out of one of Thomas's old woodworking books, which he'd borrowed from me in September and returned with a post-it note that said, "Thank you. I see why he loved this." My mother was there. She'd come down from Sudbury, and she was quieter than I'd ever seen her, and at some point during dinner she covered my hand with hers and said, "I should have been the one standing between you two girls and everything hard. You shouldn't have had to do it alone." She didn't elaborate, and she didn't need to. I squeezed her hand once and let go. After the plates were cleared and the butter tarts he'd made from Thomas's recipe were on the table, my sister stood up. She wasn't giving a speech. She was just standing, the way you stand when you need the other person to see your whole face. "I spent 3 years building a version of myself that wasn't true," she said. "And then I spent one very bad evening making sure the only person who knew the real version wasn't allowed in the room." She looked at me. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't cover it. I just need you to know I know what I did." I looked at her for a long time. "Eat your butter tart," I said, "and then tell me about that lumber under the tarp outside. Because if you've got maple stock and a weekend free, I want to see what you're planning to build with it." She laughed. It was the realest sound I'd heard from her in years. On the drive back to Kingston, I kept the radio off again. But the silence felt different this time. Not empty, full of the particular quiet that settles after something true has finally been said and received and set down for good. When I got home, I went to the nightstand and opened Thomas's maple box. I added one more thing, the butter tart recipe on an indexed card in his handwriting, the one I'd packed to bring with me for the trip, flour and sugar measurements, in his neat small print. Small and ordinary and exactly the kind of detail he would have appreciated. I closed the lid with a gentle click. Outside, the January dark was settled and still, and the bungalow was warm. The back stair was fixed now, new lumber, proper joinery, solid underfoot. I'd done it myself in October with a borrowed circular saw and Thomas's instruction book open on the porch railing beside me. It took one afternoon. I still don't know why I waited so long.